It was the annual Memorial Day barbecue in our suburban neighborhood, and I should have been enjoying the warm sunshine and the mouth-watering aromas of sizzling burgers. Instead, a cold sense of dread washed over me as I overheard a hushed conversation between Nancy Wilson and Claire Robinson. "Did you hear about Neil Morrison's shady business dealings?" Nancy whispered conspiratorially. "Rumor has it he's been skimming profits off that craft brewery his wife inherited." My heart plummeted at the mention of my husband's name. I discreetly moved closer, trying to blend in with the gathered crowd. Claire shook her head. "That's not all. I heard he's been having an affair with that young aide who works for the mayor." Rage and disbelief boiled inside me. An affair? Embezzlement? Impossible. Neil and I had been together since college, building a wonderful life centered around family values and my grandfather's cherished brewery legacy. "Mom, can I have another burger?" My 5-year-old son Milo tugged at my sundress, jarring me from my whirlwind of emotions. I plastered on a smile, ruffling his blonde hair. "Of course, honey. Why don't you ask Dad to grill you one?" As Milo scampered off to find Neil, I caught the pitying looks from Nancy and Claire. Did they suspect I had overheard? My cheeks burned with humiliation and anger. How dare they gossip about my husband behind my back? Later that evening, after putting Milo to bed, I stormed into the living room where Neil was watching TV. "We need to talk." He glanced up, eyebrows raised. "What's wrong, babe?" The use of that sickeningly sweet nickname made me want to scream. "I overheard something disturbing at the barbecue today, about you." Neil's expression hardened, eyes narrowing. "What kind of rumors are people spreading now? That you've been embezzling from the brewery and having an affair with the mayor's aide." The words tumbled out in a torrent, each one slicing into my heart. For a long moment Neil was silent, his face unreadable. Then he let out a bitter laugh. "You can't be serious, Lena. You're going to believe the malicious gossip of bored suburban housewives over your own husband?" "So it's not true?" I pressed, searching his eyes for any flicker of deception. He rose from the couch, putting his hands on my shoulders as he looked me squarely in the eye. "Of course it's not true. You're my world, Lena. You and Milo. I would never betray our family like that." His words should have reassured me, but a nagging seed of doubt had taken root. As I gazed at the man I thought I knew better than anyone, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was lying to me. Over the next few days, I found myself scrutinizing Neil's every move, his tardiness from work, his secretive phone calls, his unexplained absences. Each discrepancy fed the growing beast of suspicion gnawing at me. I knew I couldn't ignore the rumors any longer. For the sake of my son and my family's legacy, I had to find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Little did I know, the secrets I was about to uncover would shatter my world forever. In the days following the barbecue, I was consumed by a hunger for the truth that gnawed at me incessantly. Neil's nonchalant dismissal of the rumors did little to quell my growing doubts and suspicions about who he really was. I knew I needed evidence, something concrete, to validate or refute the whispers about his misdeeds. Hiring a private investigator crossed my mind, but that felt like an extreme violation of Neil's privacy, at least for now. My mind raced as I tried to think of ways to discreetly look into his affairs. That's when I noticed his car's glove compartment looked disheveled, as if it had been hastily closed. Steeling my nerves, I popped it open after Neil left for work one morning. My hands trembled as I rummaged through its contents until my fingers landed on an unfamiliar burner phone. My heart pounded as I turned it on, watching the home screen flicker to life, to reveal a stream of coded messages. 7 p.m., warehouse on 5th. Packages secured, funds will be transferred. Need to keep this off HQ's radar. The knot in my stomach twisted tighter with each cryptic message I read. What kind of shady deals was Neil mixed up in? I felt sick just imagining the possibilities. "Working late again, babe?" Neil's voice made me nearly jump out of my skin as he strolled into the living room, loosening his tie. I fumbled to turn off the burner phone and stuff it back into the glove compartment. "Yeah, just catching up on some emails." He quirked an eyebrow at me. "Everything okay? You seem jumpy." Mustering all my willpower, I plastered on what I hoped was a convincing smile. "I'm fine, just feeling a bit run down from this merger we're working on at the brewery." The lie tasted bitter on my tongue, but Neil seemed to accept it with a nod and a peck on my cheek before wandering off to the kitchen. That night, after Neil fell into a whiskey-laced slumber, I tiptoed to his home office and booted up his computer, my heart pounding in my ears. If he was engaging in something illegal, maybe there would be evidence on here. Email after email only deepened the pit of dread in my stomach. Communications about under-the-table payments, confidential brewery recipes being covertly shared with competitors, dollar amounts that made my head spin just looking at them. The man I thought I knew was a mirage. This emails laid bare the harsh reality. Neil was a liar, a cheat, a criminal. He had been defrauding my family's company and betraying my trust in the cruelest way imaginable. Tears stung my eyes as I finally understood the depth of his deceit. But my anguish was rapidly being replaced by a scorching anger. How dare he defile everything my grandfather built from the ground up through decades of hard work and integrity? I would make Neil pay for this. He would face the consequences for every last illicit deal, every betrayal, every moment of treachery. I didn't know how yet, but I would bring him down. No more Mrs. Nice Wife. It was time to fight fire with fire. Armed with the damning evidence from Neil's computer and burner phone, I knew I needed professional help to properly investigate the full extent of his betrayal. I kept a low profile around Neil, continuing to play the role of the doting, oblivious wife as I secretly met with a private investigator named Frank Jennings. Frank was grizzled and no-nonsense, just the type I needed to discreetly dig into Neil's tangled web of lies. We met at a diner on the outskirts of town to discuss my concerns. "You were right to come to me, Mrs. Morrison," Frank said gruffly as he pored over the emails and messages I had printed out. "This is some serious shady shit your husband is mixed up in." I cringed at his blunt delivery, but appreciated his candidness. "Just call me Lena. And yeah, it seems Neil has been very busy behind my back with God knows what kind of illegal dealings." Frank nodded, rubbing his stubbly chin. "Well, from what I can gather, we're looking at embezzlement, fraud, corporate espionage, and this here?" He tapped one of the messages. "Looks like your hubby might also be having himself a little extramarital fun, too." My cheeks burned at the insinuation. An affair? With who?" "Some young thing name of Marina Castillo. She's an aide for the mayor." The words felt like a physical blow to my gut. An affair. How could I have been so blind? Over the next few weeks, Frank gathered an overwhelming mountain of proof. Financial records, surveillance photos, witness testimonies. It became undeniable that Neil had not only been systematically looting funds from my family's brewery, but also selling corporate secrets and confidential recipes to our biggest competitors. And his mistress, Marina, appeared to be his willing accomplice and confidant through it all. One night, Frank played me an audio recording of Neil and Marina meeting at a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. Between the lewd giggling and cringeworthy pet names, my heart shattered into pieces all over again as I listened to them conspire about their next underhanded scheme. When the recording ended, tears of humiliation and rage streamed down my face. Frank sat silently, no doubt used to these kinds of emotional breakdowns from the spouses of cheaters and liars like Neil. But underneath my grief, a bright ember of fury was being stoked into an unquenchable blaze. I would make Neil regret ever crossing me and jeopardizing everything I held dear. "What now, Mrs. Lena?" Frank asked gruffly, sensing the shift in my demeanor. I stared out the diner window at the grimy street, my jaw clenched with resolve. "Now, we take that bastard down. Make him pay for every last sin." For weeks, I had been frozen by the agony of Neil's betrayal. But the time for wallowing in shock and pity was over. He had awoken a vengeful awoke in me, and heaven help Neil once I was done with him. The drive home from the diner felt like I was in a trance. My mind whirled with equal parts fury and strategy as I plotted how to bring Neil's house of lies crashing down around him. Part of me yearned to storm into the house, to hurl the incriminating evidence in his smug face, and watch the shock and shame wash over him. But I forced myself to remain calm and calculated. I needed to keep playing the role of the unsuspecting wife a little longer, let him dig his grave even deeper before I buried him in it. When I arrived home, Neil was watching TV with a glass of scotch, looking utterly unbothered. "Hey, babe, you were out late again," he remarked as I entered, putting on my best nonchalant act. Yeah, just tying up some loose ends at the brewery. The lie slid smoothly off my tongue as I fought to keep my contempt hidden behind a placid smile. Neil grinned and patted the spot beside him. Well, get your cute butt over here. There's still time for a little nightcap. He waggled his eyebrows lasciviously. Bile rose in my throat as I imagined him making those same lecherous overtures to his precious Marina, but I swallowed my revulsion and slinked over to cuddle up beside him, playing along with his game as I plotted his downfall. Over the next few days, I watched Neil continue his dual life of deception, smiling to my face while gallivanting around indulging his sleazy vices behind my back. The oblivious routine he kept up around me, unaware of how much I knew, was almost comical. Finally, I could take no more of the charade. I cornered him in the kitchen one afternoon after confirming Milo was over at a friend's house. "What's going on, babe? You've seemed off lately," Neil asked with a carefully measured dose of concern as he poured himself a drink. I stalked up to him, snatching the crystal tumbler from his hands and slamming it down with a crash, splattering scotch across the counter. "Cut the crap, Neil! I know everything!" He recoiled in shock before quickly regaining his composure, lips curling into a sneer. "Really? And what, pray tell, do you think you know? I know about the embezzlement from my family's company. I know you've been selling corporate secrets to our competitors. I know about your sordid little fling with Marina." To his credit, Neil barely flinched, covering his surprise with a condescending chuckle. Lena, you've really let your imagination run wild this time. This is just sad, not to mention insulting. After everything we've been through together?" He took a step towards me, reaching out to caress my cheek almost tenderly. "You're my world, babe. You have to know that. All these crazy accusations, they're just paranoid delusions." My blood boiled at his mocking, gaslighting tone. In one blistering motion, I whipped out the burner phone with the incriminating messages and hurled it squarely at his face, watching it clock him in the jaw. Neil reeled back, clutching his face and staring at me with a mask of shock and wounded pride. "You crazy bye!" "Shut up," I roared, adrenaline and pure venom coursing through me. "I have proof of every last depraved thing you've done. Financial records, recordings, everything. So cut the innocent act, you slimy bastard." We stood in seething silence for a moment, each glaring at the other with a molten contempt. His eyes flickered with uncertainty for a brief second before hardening once more. Neil straightened up, puffing out his chest defiantly. "You think you've got me all figured out, huh? You don't know a goddamn thing, Lena. Not really." With that vague, ominous warning, he stormed out, leaving me breathing raggedly amid the wreckage. The gauntlet had been thrown. Now the real battle would begin. After the explosive confrontation with Neil, the air was thick with tension around the house. He tried putting on a nonchalant front, but I could sense the disquiet lurking beneath his arrogant facade. For my part, I stayed coldly civil, biding my time and gathering more ammunition for the war ahead. Frank, the private investigator, had become my closest confidant during this chaos. We met frequently at our discreet diner to review the mounting evidence of Neil's malfeasance. "This is some heavy stuff, Lena," Frank remarked one afternoon as he shuffled through the incriminating financial records. "Your husband's looking at serious prison time if we take this to the DA's office." I nodded grimly, wrapping my hands around my coffee mug. As much as Neil's betrayal sickened me, the idea of him rotting behind bars gave me no joy either. I just wanted to uproot the cancer he'd planted in my family's legacy. "Actually, Frank, I had something else in mind for dealing with this dirtbag." He cocked an eyebrow quizzically, so I laid out my plan to launch a coordinated takedown at the brewery's upcoming annual gala. Neil's misdeeds would be explosively revealed before the entire community, destroying his credibility and showing everyone his true colors. "You sure you want to go nuclear like that?" Frank asked skeptically. "Public humiliation on that scale, it's no walk in the park." "He deserves that and more for what he's done," I replied, feeling my anger flare up again. "Neil has jeopardized my family, our business, our entire livelihood, all in service of funding his vices and stroking his ego. It's time he suffered the consequences of his selfish choices." In the following days, I doubled down on my efforts, coordinating an allied strike force against Neil. Longtime business partners and vendors Neil had swindled were eager to join the crusade after I presented the facts. Several employees he'd deceived also threw their support behind my insurrection, providing even more damaging testimony. On the home front, Neil had clearly sensed the shifting winds. His usual suave hubris had given way to sullenness and paranoia that he tried masking with more alcohol. "Why do you keep looking at me like that?" he demanded one night as I lingered in the living room while he channel surfed. I met his accusatory glare evenly. "Like what? Like you've got some twisted scheme brewing in that head of yours?" He took a swig from his tumbler, amber liquid sloshing over the rim. I shrugged nonchalantly. "What would give you that idea?" Neil opened his mouth to retort, but seemed to think better of it, grinding his jaw sullenly before returning his gaze to the television. I watched dispassionately as he quickly drained his glass, gazing through hooded eyes at the monster I once called my husband. The gala was only a few nights away. He would finally get the reckoning he deserved, and the brewing storm would break at last. The night of the brewery's annual gala had arrived, and an electric sense of anticipation coursed through me. Tonight would be Neil's night of reckoning, after months of lies and betrayal. I had gathered an army of witnesses and co-conspirators, disgruntled employees, vengeful business partners, anyone Neil had wronged during his reign of duplicity. Frank and I had meticulously compiled all the evidence into an undeniable case that would detonate at the climax of the evening. "You ready for this?" Frank muttered under his breath as we made our entrance into the lavish event hall where the gala was being held. I gave a terse nod, scanning the milling crowd of the city's business elite until my eyes landed on Neil, holding court near the bar as always. He was all smiles and swagger, downing a glass of scotch and soaking up the attention. For a fleeting moment, a ghost of my old affection for him stirred in my chest. Then I remembered the mountains of incriminating evidence detailing his litany of sins, the embezzlement, the corporate espionage, the callous infidelity. Any empathy I felt withered on the vine. The gala proceeded according to tradition: stuffy speeches, self-congratulatory award presentations, endless schmoozing over overpriced hors d'oeuvres. All the while, I bided my time, waiting for Neil's moment in the spotlight when I would detonate the bombshell. "And what a year it's been for our hometown brewery," the mayor herself was saying as she took the stage, grinning broadly with Neil standing beside her. Thanks to our good friend Neil Morrison's outstanding leadership, the company has achieved remarkable growth and success. I caught Neil's eye from across the crowd and the ghost of a wink as he basked in the accolades. I suppressed the urge to sneer in revulsion. "So it is my privilege to present to Neil the Businessman of the Year award." The mayor began clapping proudly, the entire audience following suit in thunderous applause. This was it. I gave Frank a steely nod, and he immediately dimmed the lights as I strode up on stage, ripping the microphone from the mayor's hands. "Hold your applause," I growled, glaring out at the shocked, confused crowd. "Neil Morrison doesn't deserve any awards tonight. He's a crook and a criminal who's been robbing this brewery and this city blind." A deafening silence fell over the audience. Neil's expression morphed into one of outraged disbelief. "What is the meaning of this?" He sputtered as I unleashed a blistering recitation of the laundry list of offenses: embezzlement figures, incriminating emails, records of illicit transactions. Each salvo burrowed in like shrapnel, drawing gasps and murmurs from the gala crowd. When I turned to Neil's mistress, Marina, sitting in the front row, I saw her features contorted in horror. And let's not forget, while Neil was looting from his employees and business partners, he was also stupping around behind my back with this little hussy. Chaos erupted in the event hall as Marina burst into hysterical tears. Other audience members erupted in raucous shouts and boos directed towards the stage. Through it all, Neil stood rooted to the spot, his face rapidly cycling through a spectrum of emotions: anger, panic, fear. I locked eyes with him, letting him absorb the debilitating optics of his public immolation. After sowing so many seeds of betrayal and deception, the harvest he reaped was a bitter, devastating reckoning. Within days, Neil was under arrest, slapped with multiple charges including embezzlement, bribery, and corporate fraud. His reputation and credibility were in smoldering ruins. I couldn't deny a deep sense of gratification watching karma render its ultimate verdict on my deceitful husband. But our saga wasn't over quite yet. In the aftermath of Neil's catastrophic public downfall at the gala, the legal heavens came crashing down on him with biblical force. He was swiftly arrested and hauled off in handcuffs as the damning evidence I had compiled with Frank's help was presented to the district attorney. Charges rained down like hellfire: embezzlement, corporate fraud, tax evasion, bribery. For weeks leading up to Neil's trial, a frenzy of media coverage dissected every tawdry detail of his betrayals. His affair with Marina was breathlessly splashed across the front pages, complete with the sordid recordings Frank had obtained of their indiscreet liaisons. The brewing company's shady business dealings and the plundering of its coffers were mercilessly exposed for the world to gape at. Reporters camped outside our home, hungry for any fresh morsel of scandal from the Morrison family drama. Through it all, Neil remained defiant, head held high as he arrived at the courthouse in his expensive suits. Only the faint muscle twitching in his clenched jaw hinted at the maelstrom of panic and loathing swirling beneath that arrogant veneer. "This is a disgraceful sham being perpetrated by my unhinged wife," he snarled at a pack of reporters shoving microphones in his face. "I was betrayed and set up by someone I trusted, but the truth will come out, and I will be exonerated." His audacious use of the victim card only fueled my resolve as I took the stand and mercilessly dismantled his lies over multiple searing days of testimony. I presented the documented evidence, layer by damning layer, until his pathetic protestations of innocence crumbled to ash. Marina, his former mistress, proved to be his ultimate undoing. Likely realizing her culpability and facing potential charges of her own, she flipped on Neil in exchange for leniency. The lurid details of their affair and illicit financial entanglements she revealed had the jury visibly recoiling in disgust. "Your Honor, this man is a rapacious, narcissistic con-man who shattered my family's legacy with his unchecked greed and debauchery," I declared in my closing statement, leveling an accusatory glare at Neil. "He has earned nothing less than the most severe punishment the law can deliver." Neil held my gaze for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Perhaps in those seconds, he finally glimpsed the man he had become. A ravenous, immoral shell obsessed only with satisfying his own vain desires at any cost. When the judge finally read the jury's verdict of guilty on all counts, I felt an immense weight lift from my shoulders. Justice, at long last. The emotional circus played out in hushed murmurs and camera flashes around me. But my focus was solely on Neil, shoulders slumped in defeat, as the bailiff slapped cuffs around his wrists and led him away to await sentencing. He deserved every agonizing second of this humiliation after the suffering he had inflicted on me and our family. At the sentencing weeks later, the judge took no pity on Neil, slamming him with over 2 decades in federal prison, plus millions in fines and restitution. As they hauled him off, I locked eyes with my disgraced husband one final time. He opened his mouth, perhaps to finally offer a sliver of apology or remorse. But I'd heard enough of his lies. With a curt shake of my head, I turned and walked out of that courtroom a free woman at last. The lengthy legal saga was finally over. But aside from justice served, there remained the matter of salvaging my family's brewery from the rubble of Neil's selfish decimation. With Neil's epic downfall now complete and the legal turmoil finally behind me, it was time to start rebuilding what he had so selfishly torn down. My family's brewery needed to rise like a phoenix from the ashes of his greed and deception. I rolled up my sleeves and got to work, poring over the company's finances with a newly hired forensic accounting team. The scale of Neil's embezzlement and corporate sabotage was even more staggering than I had initially uncovered. Millions had been siphoned into his secret slush funds. Invaluable trade secrets and recipes had been illicitly sold off to our biggest competitors, eroding our market share and brand value. It was a miracle the entire enterprise hadn't already collapsed under the weight of his treachery. My first priority was to cut out the lingering rot and install safeguards to prevent anything like this from ever happening again. I fired every last person, even tangentially complicit in enabling Neil's underhanded schemes. A new, if costly, corporate ethics program with robust auditing and oversight protocols was swiftly implemented. With a new, streamlined leadership team of my most trusted allies in place, we began the painful process of judicial asset repatriation, recouping as much of the stolen money and intellectual property as possible. It was a labyrinthine legal quagmire that seemed never-ending. "Don't worry, Mom, you've got this," Milo encouraged one night as I was hunched over spreadsheets, my eyes throbbing from hours of scrutinizing Neil's complex money trail. "You're the strongest person I know." My son's words were a soothing balm. He was my true north, the unblemished kernel of goodness that had survived the scorched earth of his father's villainy. I pulled Milo into a fierce embrace, realizing just how much of his childhood had been tainted by the atmospheric tension of Neil's secret misdeeds. No more. I vowed then and there that Milo would grow up witnessing the integrity and righteous resilience modeled by his mother in the wake of this nightmare. With each agonizing step forward in the long journey of restoring the brewery's tarnished reputation and fiscal solvency, I felt lighter. The shackles of denial and delusion about Neil's true nature no longer weighed me down. I had faced the hardest truths about the man I once loved and slayed those dragons. Some nights I still found my mind wandering what direction Neil's life had careened off toward behind those cold, unfeeling bars of his prison cell. I felt pity for the broken husk of a man he must have become, but any lingering hint of affection had been seared away by the betrayal and trauma he inflicted. A few years into my tenure as the new CEO, I made the ceremonial first pour of a fresh batch of our flagship IPA, using the original recipe from my grandfather's time at the helm. As I sipped the crisp, hoppy ale, the flavors carried more significance than just simple refreshment. This beer represented reclaimed legacy, righteous perseverance in the face of greed and deception, and enduring pride in doing things the right way through honesty and integrity. The brewery's annual holiday gala arrived again, always a festive source of community cheer and revelry. Except now, there were no seedy undercurrents of scandal or seething familial disharmony. Just joy, optimism, and renewed faith in the decades-old local institution that had been reborn under my steady hand. As I looked out over the smiling, celebrating crowd, I felt an immense sense of catharsis. The demons had been purged, the damage repaired. Neil's poisoned husk had been excised, and my family's true spirit preserved. It was a new dawn for me, for Milo, for the brewery's next generation of ethical, honorable leadership. My vengeance had been equally punishing and restorative, fitting justice for the man who tried to burn it all down for his own selfish vices. And in the end, I got to build it all back up stronger than ever before.
Hello, I'm Amber, a 30-year-old. I've been married to Patrick for 3 years now. We don't have children yet. Our lives took a significant turn following the unexpected death of Patrick's father, Jesse. At the time, we were residing in a different state, and the news of Jess's sudden heart attack came as a complete shock. During the funeral, Patrick's uncle subtly hinted that Patrick, being the youngest and only son, was expected to return home to be closer to family and help his mother cope. A few months later, Patrick revealed that he had secured a transfer to an office closer to his family home. He made this decision on his own and informed me afterward, which upset me because such a major decision should have involved both of us. When I expressed my frustration, Patrick apologized and explained that he anticipated my objections. He admitted knowing that I have a strained relationship with his mother, Mary, which is mutual. When we lived farther away, our visits to his parents were limited to extended holidays, mostly due to our work commitments. Mary often complained about our infrequency, comparing us to Amanda and Diane, Patrick's sisters, who live nearby and visit often. Despite the distances and costs involved, Patrick always defended our situation. Our relationship with Mary had always been a bit tense but manageable. However, Mary's main grievance with me centered around us not having children yet. She had once bluntly questioned this during a summer visit, embarrassingly focusing on my ability to bear children, even comparing me unfavorably to her daughters, who also don't have children. Mary's outdated views and strange comments on societal responsibilities regarding childbirth always irritated me. Yet when Mary fell ill, even Patrick became notably worried, which influenced our recent drastic changes. With Patrick moving back and me quitting my job, I faced the daunting prospect of more frequent interactions with Mary. I had contemplated letting Patrick move back alone, especially after hearing about a friend's distressing experience with her husband's infidelity during a business trip. After careful consideration, I decided to join Patrick, reasoning that we wouldn't be living together continuously anyway. To my surprise, Mary seemed genuinely pleased with my decision. 3 weeks later, she invited me over for tea, marking the first time I accepted such an invitation from her, albeit reluctantly. When I arrived at my in-laws' house, Mary and Amanda were there to greet me. "Amber, it's been so long. Why haven't you visited since moving here?" Amanda asked, her tone laced with sarcasm. Inside, I was already regretting my decision to come. Mary chimed in almost cheerfully. "I was so happy when you decided to move closer, but it seems I was mistaken. You don't like me, do you?" I wanted to affirm her suspicion just to see her reaction, but of course I held back. "I don't dislike you. It's just that I've been feeling unwell due to adjusting to the new environment," I explained, which was partly true. I had been resting at home due to fatigue, and Patrick hadn't mentioned this visit to me. Why was I here today, just to endure their harsh words? Mary quickly accused me of disliking her, but wasn't it the other way around? How are we supposed to get along under these conditions? Amanda sharply interjected, "How can you speak to your mother-in-law like that? Apologize to her. Say you're sorry." I expected Mary to respond with anger, but her reply caught me off guard. "You're right, I have been mean. I'm sorry, Amber. I'm also sorry about the comments regarding children. I was being nosy." I braced myself for a lecture, anticipating some hidden snark, but there was none. Even Amanda looked surprised. "All I wanted was to hold a grandchild," Mary confessed. She explained that Amanda's husband was infertile, and Diane seemed to have fertility issues, so she had pinned her hopes on Patrick and me. Despite knowing about Amanda and Diane's struggles, Patrick and I had discussed having children and were considering it. So I asked for some patience. "Please just give us some time," I said, bowing my head slightly. Despite everything, I couldn't shake off my sense of duty. "I'm sorry," I added, "but do visit us sometimes." After that, Mary and Amanda resumed watching TV and sipping their tea, as if the earlier tension had never happened. "I like this announcer," Mary remarked about her favorite local TV personality. "She's so energetic and bright." Watching them in the TV, I felt a pang of regret. Maybe if I had been more outgoing, things could have been different with Mary and her family. It was a fleeting, somewhat naive thought. I was relieved to have shared my feelings earlier that day, hoping it might lead to better relations. Yet my optimism was short-lived. That evening, Patrick stormed in, visibly upset. "I heard from Mom that you said you have no intention of getting along." She was crying. "Amber, what did you say to her?" I was stunned by his reaction. Just earlier, he had left with a smile, and now he seemed to be accusing me of something entirely different. "Patrick, there's been a misunderstanding." I tried to clarify. I told her it's difficult for me to be friends, given our current relationship. How does that translate to me not wanting to get along? I was scared now. Patrick seemed to fully believe Mary's twisted version of the story. His earlier smile now appeared deceptive, and I didn't know how to navigate this. I tried to explain further, but he wasn't convinced. Then my phone buzzed with a message from Amanda. "After all the effort of moving here, weren't you prepared to make it work? If you're here with us, you need to be a bit more patient." Patrick glanced at me as if echoing Amanda's words. I moved here because I cared about being with him, not just to appease Mary and Amanda. Facing Patrick, I held his gaze and said, "It's clear that Mary and the others might never approve of me. Maybe you should consider someone she likes more." The word divorce slipped out before I could catch it, and for the first time, Patrick looked genuinely alarmed. "Wait, hold on. How did we jump to divorce? I just want you to get along better with my family," he said, bewildered by the turn of the conversation. He couldn't grasp that his family might never accept me, which left me equally baffled. However, Patrick seemed determined to resolve the misunderstanding. The next day, he returned late from work and relayed his conversation with his mother. She admitted there was a misunderstanding and apologized. "What a fuss," he said. He also mentioned that Mary's birthday was approaching and suggested, "How about we celebrate her birthday at a fancy restaurant?" The sudden shift from turmoil to talks of celebration left me perplexed, but it was clear Patrick was making an effort to mend fences, even if the path seemed incredibly rocky. Patrick suggested that if we presented the birthday dinner as my idea, perhaps it could positively shift his mother's perception of me. Though I was skeptical of Mary's ability to appreciate such gestures sincerely, given her complex personality, I agreed to make the restaurant reservation. I invited Amanda and the others, specifying a table for 8. Patrick consented, but as the date drew near, a sense of unease grew within me. Patrick had been distant lately, giving only indifferent responses to my attempts at conversation, which made me feel increasingly isolated. On the day of the dinner, we arrived at the restaurant to find Mary, Amanda, and their spouses already gathered. The host showed Patrick and me to our table, casting a questioning glance that only added to my discomfort. "Happy birthday, Mary." I greeted her cheerfully, trying to bridge the gap. However, Mary didn't even acknowledge me. Instead, she turned to the others, thanking them for joining her celebration. It felt like a deliberate snub. Amanda seemed confused. "I thought today was a family gathering," she remarked, looking at me with a brief, puzzled expression. Diane, noticing the tension, looked over with concern. At that moment, I realized I was being deliberately excluded. Resolving not to let it ruin my evening, I decided to keep to myself and leave early. Just as I was settling into this plan, a staff member approached our table with an awkward demeanor. "I'm sorry, but the reservation was actually made for 7 people today," he informed us. Confused, I responded, "I distinctly reserved for 8. Could there be a mistake?" "No, it should definitely be for 8. I pressed, recounting my conversation over the phone. "Oh yes, but about a week ago, we received a call from a gentleman asking to change the number to 7. The worker explained, stunned. I turned to Patrick, looking for an explanation. His response floored me. "Yes, please service for S. Everyone's here now," he stated plainly, confirming the change himself. At that moment, I felt a mix of betrayal and disbelief. Patrick's actions made it clear that despite his words, his commitments to smooth family tensions were superficial at best. The realization that he had manipulated the situation without my knowledge was deeply unsettling, casting a shadow over what was supposed to be a festive family gathering. I stood there stunned as Patrick turned to me with an accusatory glare. "I heard from Mom that you've been undermining our family, saying I don't earn enough and that I'm insensitive. You had a lot to say, huh?" It turned out that a week ago, when Patrick contacted Mary about the dinner reservation, she had filled his ears with all sorts of falsehoods. Blinded by anger and believing her, he had called the restaurant pretending to be me and reduced the reservation from 8 to 7. The staff, recognizing the family surname, didn't question the change. I couldn't fathom how Patrick could be so easily missiled in such a brief span. With this realization, I questioned my presence there. When I confronted Patrick, demanding he apologize to everyone present and reflect on his actions, he did something unexpected. He insisted that I should apologize to my in-laws and then go home alone to think things over. Naturally, I refused. I couldn't admit to things I hadn't said, nor did I need a husband who took his mother's word over his wife's. Tears of frustration welled up in my eyes. Why had I even followed him here? Seeing my distress, Patrick began to panic, but it was too late. Mary watched the unfolding scene with a smug smile, clearly pleased that her scheme was working. I spoke coldly to Patrick. Next time, marry a younger, more docile daughter-in-law. Maybe then you'll have children and be happier. Mary's response was sharp and cutting. Amber, why don't you go back to your parents' house? A daughter-in-law is ultimately an outsider. I can't see you as family. You're not charming at all, so please leave quickly. Her words stung, but they also cemented my resolve. I'd leave even without you telling me. I'd like to see someone who can actually get along with someone as twisted as you. I retorted and turned to walk out of the restaurant. Patrick remained silent, his head buried in his hands. Just as I reached the exit, I heard someone calling my name. It was Diane and her husband. Amber, wait, Diane said, clearly distressed. I can't stand it anymore. Mom and Amanda haven't changed at all. I knew that gossip about you was false. Diane's acknowledgement of the truth amidst the chaos brought me a small sense of solace as she continued, indicating she was ready to cut ties with the toxicity. This moment of solidarity, though small and coming during a time of overwhelming emotion, hinted at some support within the family, something I desperately needed right then. As I stood there digesting Diane's words, my phone rang, flashing Mary's name. I sighed, what now? But before I could answer, Patrick's name replaced hers on the display. Muttering under my breath, I watched Diane and her husband exchange knowing looks. Amber, you might want to go back to the restaurant. You might see something interesting, Diane suggested, her eyes hinting at a twist I hadn't anticipated. They left, looking oddly pleased with themselves. I hesitated, but curiosity won over my desire to distance myself from the drama. When I finally answered Patrick's call, his voice was frantic, tinged with panic. Amber, I'm sorry. I didn't realize it was all a lie. I'll send the divorce papers later, he blurted out, but then quickly pleaded, wait. Can't you come back, please? It's a lifetime request. His almost childish plea almost made me laugh, but remembering Diane's cryptic hint, I decided to return to the restaurant. Upon arriving, I was met by an unexpected scene. A crowd was gathered around Patrick's table where a local TV announcer, Mary's favorite, was speaking into a microphone. The atmosphere was electric with tension. Mary was stumbling over her words, clearly struggling to explain herself. No, that's not it. It's a misunderstanding, she stammered. Patrick and Amanda looked both awkward and uneasy, clearly not prepared for this turn of events. The announcer, microphone in hand, pressed Mary further. You loudly declared in the restaurant that Amber is an outsider and should leave. What did you mean by that? Please explain in detail. Meanwhile, Diane's husband, along with others who had been offended by the earlier events, had quietly left the scene. It all seemed surreal as I stood there somewhat dumbfounded, piecing together that this had turned into a public spectacle, possibly being broadcasted. I realized then that I had forgotten to confirm the reservation details amidst the initial chaos. As I tried to make sense of the situation, a staff member approached, noting my confusion. It's been quite a day, hasn't it? They remarked, explaining that a TV recording had been scheduled at the restaurant that very day, which explained the unexpected media presence. The entire ordeal had unexpectedly played out on live television, casting the family drama in a stark, unfiltered light for all to see. As I processed the unfolding events, I couldn't help but feel a mix of vindication and disbelief at the bizarre turn my evening had taken. Although the dining area offered some privacy, conversations could still be easily overheard. Just after I stepped out, a famous TV announcer approached Mary with a beaming smile, ready to conduct an interview. Mary, an avid fan, was visibly excited. "An interview? Absolutely," she exclaimed enthusiastically. "The topic is daughter-in-law and mother-in-law relationships. We heard there was a heated argument earlier, and the daughter-in-law left in tears. Can you tell us what happened?" The announcer asked, putting Mary on the spot. Caught off guard by this direct question, Mary and Amanda's complexions paled, clearly at a loss to openly discuss the embarrassing truth about how they had manipulated the situation to alienate their son's wife. Patrick, spotting me from a distance, made a desperate plea. "Amber, please. I can't let this shame be known. It was all a misunderstanding," he implored, looking utterly defeated. By then, my feelings for him had evaporated. Mary tried to smooth things over with a strange smile. "Oh, we usually call each other Amber. Amber, come over here." She beckoned as I approached. The microphone was directed at me. "You say you call each other Amber, but how does the daughter-in-law view her mother-in-law?" the announcer asked. "I've never been called that," I replied calmly. "I've been called unpatriotic several times for not having children, though that's due to Patrick and I not feeling ready or confident enough to start a family. We haven't even tried for over 2 years. That's what I was always told was grounds for divorce." I recounted how Patrick had initially supported me when I first fell ill and had to take a leave from work. I appreciated his kindness and followed him here, hoping a change of environment might help, but this is the result. By then, I was out of tears and detachment had taken their place. Seeing Mary and Amanda looking embarrassed and pitiful brought a small measure of satisfaction. As I stood there, prepared for the possibility of this being broadcast nationwide, I couldn't help but reflect on this surreal day, watching Mary's distressed expression as I mentioned the broadcast. I couldn't help but smile. Well, since the daughter-in-law is considered an outsider, I guess I should leave. Goodbye, I said, savoring the moment as I exited the restaurant, ignoring the shouts and commotion that followed me out. The day had been long and fraught, but in that final moment, I felt a profound release. Walking away from that chaotic scene, I felt a mixture of relief and satisfaction. Although Mary and her family managed to prevent the broadcast of the footage, the incident had already caused quite a stir locally, becoming a hot topic among our relatives and acquaintances. The story of what had transpired spread quickly, fueling gossip and speculation. In the aftermath, I returned to my room, packed my belongings, and moved back to my parents' house. I sent the divorce papers to Patrick, but his response was delayed, prompting me to consider involving a lawyer. To my surprise, Patrick soon appeared at my parents' doorstep. My father, Peter, who is typically a composed individual, took charge of the situation with a firm hand. Patrick offered a heartfelt apology. He expressed his intention to sever ties with his own family and promised to trust only in me going forward. However, his promises now seemed hollow. Too little, too late. Peter, visibly upset by the years of distress Patrick had caused me, didn't mince words. "Why didn't you realize this sooner? What have you done to Amber all these years? Just sign the divorce papers and leave," he instructed sternly, with regret etched across his face. Patrick handed over the divorce papers, his handwriting shaky and difficult to read. Despite the initial difficulty, the papers were processed successfully. It later emerged that Amanda had been the real cause of her infertility, a fact she had wrongly attributed to her husband. Now on the brink of her divorce, she no longer visited her in-laws. Patrick went back to live with his mother, Mary, in their small hometown. They likely faced lingering, uncomfortable rumors, but that chapter of my life was closed. In the time that followed, life took a more positive turn for me. I reconnected with a classmate from my hometown, and we married. Our relationship was filled with joy, and we soon welcomed a child. We now have a 2-year-old daughter, and I am expecting our second child. My new mother-in-law is truly angelic, supportive and kind, everything Mary was not. Life is unpredictable, but at this moment, I am living a fulfilling and happy life surrounded by love and support that I once thought was beyond my reach. I stumbled back, shocked by the venom in his voice. "What are you talking about?" I asked. Charles laughed, a harsh, mean sound. "Don't play dumb, Luna. We saw your little social media post showing off your new apartment, posing with Grandma. You think we can't figure it out? It hit me what they were accusing me of. You think Grandma bought us this apartment? We know she did. Scott spat. You've been playing the poor, neglected child for years, worming your way into her good graces. Now you've tricked her into making you the sole heir." Anger surged through me, and I stood taller. "You have no idea what you're talking about. John and I bought this apartment with our own money. Money we worked hard for." Charles sneered, his eyes darting around the room. "Right, sure you did. Where's the old bat, anyway? Hiding her so we can't talk some sense into her. She should be in a cemetery by now. I can't wait for her to kick the bucket so I can sell her house and live it up." The room went deadly silent. For a second, I thought I had imagined those awful words. Then a quiet voice came from the doorway of the guest room. "So this is how you really feel about." All heads turned to see Grandma Julie standing there, her face a mix of shock and disappointment. The color drained from Scott and Charles's faces as they realized she had heard everything. "Grandma," Scott stammered, "we didn't mean." Julie raised her hand, stopping him. "I've heard enough," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Now I understand who truly values me and who sees me as just a meal ticket." Her words gave me the strength to speak. "I think you both need to leave now." For a moment, it looked like they might argue, but one look at Grandma's hurt yet resolute face made them back down. They slumped toward the door, muttering weak excuses. The aftermath of that evening hit like a storm. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing, filled with calls and messages. Each one reminded me of the mess that had blown up. Mom's name flashed on the screen for what felt like the 100th time, and against my better judgment, I considered answering. I answered the call. "Luna." Mom's voice was sharp, not sounding like a mother at all. "You need to fix this. Your grandmother is furious with the boys. You need to smooth things over and tell her it was all a misunderstanding." I let out a bitter laugh. "A misunderstanding?" They broke into my home and said they couldn't wait for her to die so they could sell her house. How is that a misunderstanding? They didn't mean it. Dad jumped in, clearly on speakerphone. "You know how the boys can be. They were just upset." "What are you upset about?" I put myself to the test. John and I used our own funds to purchase an apartment. I'm loved by my grandmother. Mom's voice became funny yet endearing. "We understand that you've always felt excluded, sweetie, but you should consider what's best for the family. That inheritance is rightfully your brother's. Avoid becoming self-centered." A part of me broke. Years of anguish and fury finally broke out. Self-centered. After years of favoritism, you're labeling me selfish, dismissing my accomplishments, and acting as though John and I don't matter. Have you the audacity to demand that I give up an inheritance that I never asked for now? Luna. Dad started, but I interrupted him. No, I finished. I'm beyond the manipulation, the guilt trips, and everything else. Please don't text, phone, or knock on my door. We're done. I blocked their phones and Scott and Charles's throughout the course of the following few days. I had to chop out something rotten-like painfully, but it was an essential step toward my healing. There was a distinct kind of warmth surrounding me as the dust settled. Grandma Julie became even more involved in our lives after realizing the dynamics of the family, which she had long assumed. Nicole, who had gotten in touch following the chaos of the wedding, started coming often. I have always known you are unique, Luna, she replied, giving me a strong embrace. I apologize for not speaking up for you sooner. Supporting responses came from other relatives, including uncles, distant aunts, and cousins who had witnessed my family's years of mistreatment of me. It was as though a curtain had been withdrawn, making room for genuine connections to blossom where there had only been duty. I was surrounded by the pure affection of John's family, bless them. His parents made a special effort to make me feel loved, even though they had watched helplessly while my own family tore me apart. John and I devoted all of our energy to furnishing our new flat. Every item of furniture and every picture hanging on the wall represented the kind of life we were creating together, one based on love, respect, and support for one another. Oh, I'm not sure that's a good idea, she interrupted me abruptly. I'll be incredibly busy, and so will your father. The boys are receiving research paper assistance from us. You know what I mean. My chest began to fill with that familiar mixture of hurt and rage as soon as I hung up the phone. However, something was different this time around, a little flicker of defiance and resolve. I glanced around my little dorm room, which consisted mostly of a partially completed repair job and a stack of art books on my desk. I had created this universe on my own, in spite of everything. This was my world now. I whispered, "Forget them," to the empty room. I don't need their approval. However, deep down I knew that wasn't true even while I was saying it. A tiny part of me hoped that my parents would eventually realize me for who I truly was and still wanted them to acknowledge me. My family didn't pay much attention to my graduation when it happened. We had a brief meal at a chain restaurant to commemorate my big day. So, Luna, what's next? Dad questioned, hardly taking his eyes from his menu. I stood up straight and attempted to project confidence. I actually got a job offer from a museum in Los Angeles. Dad scowled. I'm not sure, Luna. The cost of living in Los Angeles is high. What is the salary for this position? I felt my face get hot as I mumbled the not-so-great starting salary. The disappointment on their faces was hard to miss. The rest of the dinner was a blur of subtle criticism and more comparisons to Scott and Charles's academic success. As we were leaving the restaurant, Grandma Julie pulled me aside. "Don't let them dim your light, my dear," she whispered, slipping another small envelope into my hand. "Go to Los Angeles and chase your dreams." Inside the envelope was a check, just enough to cover my first month's rent in the city. I hugged her tightly, trying not to cry. The next few years were a whirlwind. I threw myself into my work, slowly making a name for myself in the art restoration world. During this time, I met John. He was a struggling graphic designer with a kind smile and an infectious passion for his work. We clicked instantly over our shared love of art and our experiences as underdogs in our fields. After dating for a while, I decided it was time for John to meet my family. From the moment we sat down, it was clear my parents had other plans. They fired question after question at John, each one more intense than the last. "So John," Dad began, trying to sound casual but failing, "what are your long-term career prospects?" John shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, I'm building up my client base. It takes time, but I'm making progress." Mom jumped in. "And your income. Is it enough to support a family?" My face flushed with embarrassment. "Mom, that's not." But John squeezed my hand under the table. "It's okay, Luna," he said calmly. "I'm not where I want to be financially yet, Dr. James, but I'm working hard to get there." The interrogation continued throughout dinner, and with each question, it was clear my parents weren't convinced. I could see John's confidence dropping and my own anger rising. As we were leaving, Mom pulled me aside. "Luna, honey, I know you think you care about this boy, but you need to be realistic. You've already picked a tough career path. Don't make it harder by being with someone who has no future." "Mom," I whispered, shocked at how blunt she was. Dad stepped in too. "Your mother's right, Luna. You need to think about your future. John seems nice, but is he really good enough for you? You could do so much better." I stood there speechless as all the frustration I had bottled up for years nearly boiled over. How dare they judge John? How dare they dismiss my choices once again? As John and I started planning our wedding, reality hit us hard. Our savings were pretty small, barely enough for a simple ceremony. One night, after staring at budget spreadsheets for hours, I decided to ask my parents for help. "Mom, Dad," I began cautiously during our weekly call, "John and I have set a date for the wedding. We're trying to keep costs low, but I was wondering if you might want to help out a little, maybe even just with the planning." The silence on the other end was long and uncomfortable. Finally, Mom spoke, her voice cold. "Luna, you're an adult now. If you've chosen to marry this person, you need to handle the consequences yourself." I hung up, feeling awful, but not really surprised. Once again, Grandma Julie stepped in to save the day. When I told her about the situation, she didn't hesitate. "My dear," she said warmly over the phone, "I may not be able to give you the wedding of your dreams, but I want to help make your day special." She sent some money, and while it wasn't much, it made a big difference in our plans. The wedding day came, and I had a mix of excitement and nerves. The community center we rented was simple but looked lovely, decorated with wildflowers and fairy lights. Our close friends helped with everything from the decorations to the homemade cake. As I walked down the makeshift aisle, John's face lit up with a smile that made all the struggles worth it. For a moment, I forgot about the money issues and my family's negativity, and I just soaked in the love in his eyes. That bubble burst when I saw my family. Mom and Dad sat stiffly in the front row, looking bored and unimpressed. I overheard Mom whispering to Dad about how tacky the decorations were and how cheap the food seemed. Scott and Charles were even worse, standing in the corner, laughing, and glued to their phones. I tried my best to ignore them, focusing on our vows and the kind, supportive faces of our friends. It wasn't until the next day that I realized how truly cruel they could be. When I woke up, my phone was blowing up with notifications. Scott and Charles had posted a bunch of embarrassing photos from the wedding on social media. "Congrats to our big sis on her special day." Read one caption under a blurry picture of John and me cutting our homemade cake. Another post had a sarcastic caption, "Nothing says true love like a dollar store wedding," next to a picture of our decorations. One post showed our buffet table beside a photo of a fancy meal from a high-end restaurant with a caption, "Luna's wedding versus our average Thursday lunch. Guess which is which?" The comments were brutal. Some relatives were horrified by Scott and Charles's behavior. Aunt Nicole wrote, "This is completely unacceptable. You should be ashamed of yourselves." But others found it funny. Our cousin Mark commented, "Savage but true." That wedding looked like a homeless convention. Reading through the comments made me feel sick, but what hurt the most was seeing my parents' responses. Instead of scolding their sons, they were encouraging them. Mom had commented, "Boys will be boys. It's just a bit of harmless fun." I didn't call them or demand an apology. I just decided to cut them out of my life for a while. 5 months after the wedding, it was time for the annual James family reunion. Even though I had my doubts, John thought we should go, hoping it might be a chance to clear the air. We couldn't have been more wrong. The tension was so thick you could feel it. I kept it together for the first hour, making polite conversation and avoiding my immediate family as much as possible. But then I overheard Scott bragging about his latest luxury vacation, paid for by our parents, of course. Something inside me snapped. "Must be nice," I said loud enough for everyone to hear. "To have Mom and Dad pay for your entire life." The room went silent. Scott stared at me, speechless. "What's that supposed to mean?" he finally asked. "You know exactly what it means," I replied, all the frustration I had buried for years boiling over. "You and Charles get everything handed to you on a silver platter, while I've had to fight for every bit of recognition or support." Mom stepped forward, her face red with anger. "Now, Luna, you're being ridiculous. We've always treated you kids equally." I let out a bitter laugh. "Equal? Are you serious?" "Let's talk about equal," I said, counting on my fingers. "Private school tuition for the boys, public school for me. Brand new cars for their 17th birthdays, nothing for mine, and the grand finale. $700,000 for their Ivy League educations, while I had to scrape by on scholarships and loans." The room was so silent you could hear a pin drop. Everyone was staring, watching our family's dirty laundry being aired out in front of everyone. Mom's voice was cold when she finally spoke. "If you're so obsessed with money, Luna, maybe you should have married someone rich instead of your poor husband." Her words hit me like a slap. John, who had been quietly supporting me the whole time, stiffened beside me. "How dare you?" I whispered, feeling tears in my eyes. "John is worth 10 of you. He loves me for who I am, not for how I can make him look at his country club friends." The reunion spiraled into chaos. Everyone started yelling, dragging up old grudges, years of anger spilling out. In the middle of it all, a strong voice rose above the noise. "Enough." Everyone turned to see Grandma Julie standing up. Her normally kind face looked stern and angry. "I've watched this family fall apart for years, and I won't stand for it anymore," she said firmly. "Isabella, Adam, your treatment of Luna has been shameful." She added, turning to Scott and Charles, "Your cruelty toward your sister is unforgivable." The room went silent again, but Mom never wanted to back down. "Mother, you don't understand. Luna has always been difficult, always causing problems." "No, Isabella," Grandma interrupted. "The only problem here is your obvious favoritism and your refusal to see the damage you've done." I looked around at the shocked faces of my relatives, at Grandma standing tall, and at my parents' anger, and my brother's smug expressions. At that moment, something inside me broke. But then it came back together, stronger. "I'm done," I said quietly but firmly. "I'm done trying to get your approval. Done being part of this toxic family. John and I are leaving, and don't bother trying to contact us." The months that followed were tough, but John was my rock through it all. He held me when the sadness hit, celebrated the little victories, and never once made me feel bad for the family drama I'd brought into our lives. Life has a strange way of surprising you when you least expect it. It all started with a phone call. John had been working tirelessly for weeks, pouring everything he had into a pitch for a major client. The call came on a sunny Thursday morning. I could tell from the look on John's face that something big had just happened. "We got it," he whispered, barely able to speak. "Luna, we got the contract." The next few months were a whirlwind. John's small design firm blew up overnight, and that big client opened doors we never thought we'd see. Suddenly, we weren't just getting by anymore. We were doing really well. But with all that success came an unexpected problem. My phone started lighting up with notifications, friend requests from family members I had blocked long ago, messages from distant relatives who suddenly wanted to catch up, and then the call. I had been dreading Luna. "Sweetheart," my mom's sugary, sweet voice came through the line. "We heard the wonderful news about John's business. We always knew you two would make it." The calls kept coming. My father chimed in, saying how proud they were and how they'd always believed in us. I sat there, stunned and getting angrier with every lie. "We'd love to see you," Mom chirped. "Maybe we could have dinner and celebrate your success as a family." That snapped me out of it. "As a family," I repeated, my voice hard. "We haven't been a family for a long time, and that's not going to change just because our bank account has." I stuck to my decision. When my parents showed up at our door unexpectedly, I didn't let them in. When they sent expensive gifts, I sent them back unopened. Instead, John and I focused on building the life we had always dreamed of. We worked hard, saved wisely, and soon enough, we were signing papers for a beautiful apartment right in the middle of the city. Excited to share our happiness, I posted a photo on social media. It was a simple shot of John and me holding the keys, standing in front of our new home. Next to it was a picture from our most recent visit with Grandma Julie, her proud smile shining for the camera. I captioned it, "New beginnings and old love. Grateful for those who've been there through it all." As I hit post, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. This was my family now. John, Grandma Julie, and the friends who had stuck with us through thick and thin. We had built this life ourselves, despite all the challenges and the people who said we couldn't do it. The soft evening light poured through the windows of our new apartment as I worked in the kitchen, getting dinner ready for John and Grandma Julie. It was our first real family dinner in the new place, and I wanted everything to be perfect. Suddenly, there was a loud, aggressive pounding on the front door that shattered the peace. "Luna, open up. We know you're in there." My blood ran cold. I recognized those voices anywhere. Scott and Charles. Before I could react, the door burst open, and my brothers stormed in, their faces twisted with anger. I barely had time to see John jump to his feet before Scott was in my face, jabbing his finger at my chest. "You manipulative little," he snarled. "We always knew you were playing a long game, but this is low even for you." As they say, I've always been the black sheep in my family, the odd one out. Luna James is my name. Now that I'm 32, I can honestly say that I've never truly fit in. Growing up, I was the eldest child of two physicians, Adam James and Isabella. Even though my parents were well known, I never truly benefited from any of their success. Scott and Charles, my younger twin brothers, received all the attention and benefits. It seemed as though I vanished from my parents' sight the minute those two were born. As we grew older, it became worse and more evident. At first, it was small things like receiving a larger piece of cake or better toys. I will always remember my 12th birthday. I'd been teasing for a long time about this painting set I spotted in a store display. It was a basic set with some good colors and brushes, nothing spectacular. I couldn't wait to open my one present when my birthday finally arrived, but what was inside? A workbook for math. The favoritism was staring me in the face by the time I reached my teenage years. The boys' desires always determined our family's travel plans. We would head to the slopes if Scott wanted to go skiing. Charles would head directly to the beach if he became a surfer. All of my suggestions were rejected or disregarded. Next was the entire college admission process, which is still a sensitive topic. I became enamored with art restoration when I was 18. I asked the workers at the local museum a million questions about how they restored antique artwork for hours on end. My mother acted as though I had stated I wanted to join the circus and flee when I revealed that I was studying art restoration in college. "Art restoration?" she asked, chuckling. "Luna, be serious, that's not a real job." "Yeah, Luna, why don't you do something useful like becoming a doctor?" A smug-grinding Scott even added in. I had never seen my parents look at me so proudly as they did when Scott said that. My family wasn't supportive of me, but I was determined to pursue my love. Upon receiving my college admission letters, I was overjoyed to discover that I had won an art restoration scholarship. I hurried into the kitchen and virtually cried out, "Mom, Dad," as I waved the letter around. I was awarded a scholarship. My mother blinked briefly away from her medical magazine. She responded, "That's nice, honey." Did you hear the boys got perfect scores on their SATs? It seemed like a universe away from the day the twins departed, the day I went for college. After 3 years, I prepared to board the bus for my unremarkable state school by packing my used laptop and clothing from a thrift store. My parents didn't even offer to drive me to the bus station since they were too preoccupied with their jobs. However, my Grandma Julie was the one person who never failed to accept me for who I was. That day, she showed there, and she drew me aside right before I was going to leave. She whispered, "Luna, sweetie," and placed a little package in my palm. "I'm so happy for you. Never lose sight of that." The mail contained a check. While it wasn't enough to completely transform my life, it was enough to ease the transition. The fact that she noticed me was more important than the money. That was crucial. For me, college was a somewhat uneventful experience. On the one hand, I was relieved of the constant comparison to Scott and Charles. I didn't have to compete with anyone for attention, so I could concentrate on my schoolwork. However, finances were tight, really tight. With my part-time work and scholarship, I was barely making ends meet. During family conversations and social media, I would learn about my brother's exciting adventures in the meantime. Our parents would undoubtedly finance our luxury frat parties, wild spring break excursions, internships at large hospitals, and other wonderful activities. I immersed myself in my studies as time went on. Art restoration evolved from a profession to a joyful place for me to escape to. Restoring ancient, neglected items to their former glory and exposing their hidden potential behind ages of wear and tear was incredibly fulfilling. I was able to secure an internship at a modest but reputable museum during my senior year. Although the labor was primarily cleaning and arranging, it was a start in the right direction. I was ecstatic. My mom's reaction when I called to tell her the wonderful news was precisely what I had anticipated, barely interested. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she murmured, her voice trailing off. "Have you heard of Scott's study work? It will appear in a significant medical publication." I suppressed a sigh. "That's fantastic, Mother. Hey, I was considering spending a weekend at home shortly. Perhaps we could." Polly here, and I'm 30 years old. 2 years into our dating relationship, my spouse and I were joined in marriage by a mutual friend. His name is Ethan. We're having a great time together, even if we haven't started a family yet. About 50 individuals work at the successful factory owned by Ethan's family. Ethan's late father started the company, and thanks to everyone's hard work and commitment, it has grown significantly. Maria, Ethan's sister, is currently in charge of the business. She is single, does a great job in her position, and probably got her flair for managing from their mother, because both of them are great communicators. Maria is really kind and inviting. Because I was up with two brothers, it was a welcome adjustment to feel like a sister from the moment we met. But not everything goes as planned. The plant is located near our family home, and my mother-in-law retired when my father-in-law passed away. Our coffee breaks are at 2 p.m., which I have grown to hate, but she looks forward to them. My mood always gets worse when I have to get her coffee. During these pauses, she expresses her dissatisfaction by asking why Ethan and I haven't had children yet, which is an issue beyond our control. She occasionally uses sharp language. She becomes more agitated if I don't answer, saying cruel things about how deserving I am to be Ethan's wife, and even terrible things about my parents who have passed away. When I initially met Ethan's family, there was a misunderstanding that led to this tension. My mother-in-law was obviously surprised to hear that both of my parents had died. My father from a heart attack when I was 18, and my mother from cancer when I was 18. Despite the difficulties of my upbringing, my father raised my brother and me by himself, especially because he went away before I could properly express my thanks for his efforts. I mourn him terribly. It has been difficult to navigate these familial relationships, particularly in light of my mother-in-law's criticism. But in spite of all of these difficulties, I am strengthened by my relationship with Ethan and by the generosity of some of his family, including Maria. I treasure the new family relationships I have created, and I'm becoming better at handling the more complicated ones with grace. When others hear about my upbringing, they frequently show sympathy and acknowledge the difficulties I must have had growing up without my parents. But my mother-in-law took a quite different stance. Once she said something that shocked me. "So you might not live long either, huh?" Her statements were frank and inappropriate. It was an awkward time, and my husband Ethan was as surprised as I was. Still, my mother-in-law persisted in bringing up the subject as though it were a practical one. One day, while I was struggling to figure out where I fit in the family, Maria, who had been silent up until that point, spoke out. She broke the tense mood by slamming her palm on the table. Her voice broke the tension, making everyone stop. When my mother-in-law attempted to reassure her by saying, "Are you right, Maria? Do you not agree with me?" Maria shot back a chilly gaze, asking, "What are you talking about? It's Ethan who picked Polly, and she's amazing. Why are you unable to back that?" Her mother, who respected her greatly, was taken aback by her stern and protective words, which signaled the end of her bluntly critical remarks, at least when they were said in public. Still, throughout our coffee breaks, the subtle jabs continued. I could see the disappointment in my mother-in-law's eyes when I gave her coffee, instead of Maria, when we were the only two of us. Luckily, Ethan and I didn't live with his family. Instead, we leased a place close by, saving me from being exposed to her negativity all the time, save for those few moments of time. Our brief respite from sharing a roof was cut short when our room sustained significant damage, along with many other rooms in the building, during a record-breaking hurricane. It was difficult to stay there because of the severe ceiling leak. Maria, trying to control this situation, smiled innocently and suggested a solution. "Why should I worry? Stay with us, and you'll save 25 seconds on your commute." We briefly moved in with Ethan's family due to the circumstances. Ethan, welcome home. It must have been difficult, but Mom is glad we can live together once more," my mother-in-law said warmly, focusing largely on her son. Ethan was acting like a disobedient adolescent, largely ignoring her. Then she said, catching sight of me, "Oh, Polly, you're here too. Because you're so silent, I missed it." Grin more. Though intended to be humorous, her remarks merely increased the tension, as shown by the furious look on Ethan's face. The event highlighted the intricate layers of family connections and the tenacity required to negotiate them, even when the dynamic in the household was strained. I had to adjust to living under my in-laws' roof when our apartment was damaged by a hurricane, and I moved in with them. To show my appreciation on our first night, I decided to cook dinner, preparing a simple yet hearty meal of bread, soup, and steak. Both my mother-in-law and sister-in-law complimented the meal, which eased some of my tension, and I felt a moment of genuine relief. However, an unexpected turn happened just as I thought dinner was winding down. My mother-in-law stood up, humming cheerfully, and retrieved a container from the fridge. She then generously topped her steak with its contents, which to my surprise was jam. This unusual pairing caught the attention of everyone at the table. My husband, sitting next to me, looked visibly disgusted, while Maria, with an eye roll, commented that no amount of persuasion could stop their mother from her peculiar food habits before bursting into laughter. Observing more closely, the sight of jam on a perfectly good steak was peculiar indeed. When you eat something salty, you crave something sweet, right? My mother-in-law explained, quite pleased with herself. Despite her enthusiasm, the thought alone was enough to give me heartburn. Noticing my hesitation, she encouraged me to try it, proclaiming it delicious. I managed a forced smile, which did not seem to satisfy her. "I'm recommending it for a reason. You might live longer if you follow my example," she remarked cryptically before leaving the room. My husband and Maria quickly apologized for her odd behavior, explaining that she had an intense sweet tooth and never felt her day was complete without indulging in something sugary. Apparently, her health checkups always returned normal results, which seemed miraculous given her diet. Maria then shared that she was often sent to buy cake because her mother found it embarrassing to do so herself. This errand had made Maria quite familiar with all the local cake shops. Ethan, chiming in, expressed concern about their mother's health habits, feeling guilty that Maria often had to manage their mother's whims alone. "Well, I think you guys will have to help out more from now on," Maria cheerfully declared, suggesting that we might be in for more lively interactions with my mother-in-law. Living with the in-laws, despite its challenges, had its perks, like the drastically shorter commute. But it also meant navigating a complex web of family dynamics, dietary quirks, and unexpected comments, all under one roof. I had taken on the responsibility of managing the household chores, making sure everything was in order both before and after my workday. Despite my efforts to engage in conversation with my mother-in-law, she frequently dismissed me or reacted coldly. Regardless of her attitude, she never passed up an opportunity to criticize the children over coffee breaks. Since relocating here, my days have increasingly become more challenging due to the added stress, which visibly affected my mood. My husband noticed this shift and suggested multiple times that we should visit a doctor together. He even proposed escaping to a hotel for a short break, which I declined, considering it an unnecessary expense, especially since the nearest hotel was quite a distance away. The situation took a turn for the worse when my husband announced an upcoming week-long business trip. To my dismay, he also mentioned that my sister-in-law Maria would be joining him. This meant I would be alone with my mother-in-law, which filled me with dread. Although he offered to take me along, I decided against it, hoping to endure the week despite feeling unwell. On the morning they left, Maria sent a message to my phone titled, "Mother-in-Law Survival Guide," which humorously advised, "If anything happens, just give her cake, and you'll be fine." It included a list of local cake shops and her favorite selections from each. This quirky guide was surprisingly comforting given the tough week. I was bracing for the worst, but I remained optimistic that after the week, our home renovations would be complete, and we could return to our usual living situation. However, that glimmer of hope dimmed on the first evening alone when I came back from work to find my mother-in-law confrontationally blocking the entrance. She demanded, "You know why. Angry, don't you?" I responded, somewhat exasperated, "No, I'm not psychic." It turned out I had missed both the scheduled 2 p.m. coffee breaks, something that slipped my mind amidst the chaos of juggling work and home. In the absence of my husband and Maria, I had hoped she would be understanding given her work history. But instead, she lashed out the moment we were alone, accusing me of starting this harassment and labeling me a wicked woman. I was stunned, feeling an immense disconnect and wondering why I was being treated so harshly when all I had done was inadvertently miss a couple of coffee breaks. I was counting down the days until my husband and sister-in-law returned, holding on to the hope that it was just a few more days of enduring the strained atmosphere. During a particularly rough day, I had bought a cake over my lunch break and left it in the office fridge, planning to smooth things over with my mother-in-law. When I mentioned the forgotten cake, her demeanor shifted from anger to delight. "Let's just forget today happened. Just don't forget tomorrow. Okay," she said with renewed cheerfulness before returning to her room. From then on, I was diligent about remembering the coffee breaks, knowing the drama that would ensue if I slipped up again. In the morning my husband and Maria were due back. I was overcome with stress, experiencing nausea, headaches, and a total loss of appetite. I couldn't handle work, so I took the day off to visit the hospital. The doctor's words shattered me. "It's quite serious. Can your family come right away?" I was diagnosed with cancer and given a prognosis of possibly only 2 to 5 months left. Tears stained my face as I returned home, physically shaking and emotionally spent. When I arrived, I collapsed onto the bed, only to be interrupted by the door slamming open. My mother-in-law stormed in, scolding me for skipping work while the others were hard at it. Her harsh words only intensified my headache. With little energy left, I told her I was feeling ill and turned away to close my eyes. She lingered, continuing to rant about my supposed inadequacies and even insinuating I wouldn't live long. I lay there silently, feigning sleep. Suddenly, she demanded to know why I hadn't prepared for today's coffee break. Her insensitivity was appalling. I opened my eyes to find her hovering over me. "Grace, I'm sorry. I'm just not well enough to go shopping today. Could you please?" She cut me off dismissively, demanding chocolate cake and accusing me of faking my illness. My frustration boiled over. "Shut up. Listen to me. I have 1 month to live. Go buy your damn cake, you idiot." My words left her speechless, her eyes wide in shock. At that moment, my husband and Maria appeared, alarmed by the confrontation. "Mom, what are you doing?" "And Polly, what do you mean by 1 more month?" My husband's face was pale, mirroring Maria's concern. Ignoring the visibly shaken mother-in-law, my husband rushed to my side. His support was a sudden relief, and I burst into tears. "I can't take it anymore." I sobbed. "The doctor says it might be cancer, and I feel terrible, but she keeps nagging me to go buy cake. Enough is enough. And stop bothering me about the kids, too. Just leave me alone, you idiot." All my pent-up resentment towards my mother-in-law came pouring out as I finally voiced my anguish and frustration. As I broke down in tears, my husband and sister-in-law fixed my mother-in-law with icy stares. The thought of sending a sick person out to buy a cake seemed absurd to them. Maria, usually so cheerful, now wore a grim expression that was frankly intimidating. In this tension, my husband raised his voice, revealing something deeply personal. "You've been making mean comments about us not having kids." "Well, the reason we can't have kids is because of me," he admitted. It turned out that about a year after we got married, we saw a doctor because we were having trouble conceiving. The test showed that I was fine, but there were issues with my husband's fertility. He had been devastated by the diagnosis and frequently apologized to me, looking so forlorn. I never wanted to burden him further, so I avoided discussing children. I loved our life together, just the two of us, and never considered leaving him over our inability to have children. We had kept this private, especially from my mother-in-law, knowing she would only use it to hassle us. As my husband spoke, my mother-in-law's face seemed to drain of life. Just then, my phone rang. It was the hospital calling, and the tone was urgent. They asked us to come in immediately. The call ramped up my anxiety, and I began to cry again. "It's okay, Polly, can you stand?" "I'm right here with you," my husband said, his voice thick with emotion. Together, we hurried to the hospital. When we arrived, we were quickly ushered into a room where not only the doctor, but also the hospital director were waiting. They had shocking news. There had been a dreadful mistake. My medical records had been confused with another patient who had the same name and birth date. It was a misdiagnosis. The oversight seemed unbelievable, yet the tired expressions on the faces of the medical staff spoke volumes. This error later made local news, prompting the hospital to promise a review of their procedures to prevent such a mistake again. They referred us to another hospital for a follow-up. Back at my in-laws' house, it appeared that Maria had taken the time to reprimand my mother-in-law, who now seemed smaller, almost shrinking into her chair. Maria later confessed to me that she had been terrified at the thought of her brother potentially losing his wife. The entire ordeal had brought some harsh realities to light, and it seemed to have changed the dynamics in our family, hopefully for the better. Amidst the tears and confessions, an unexpected twist of fate transformed our emotions. When my sister-in-law Maria, with genuine concern etched on her face, asked about my well-being, I revealed, with tears of joy spilling from my eyes, "I'm pregnant." Beside me, my husband began to cry, his tears reflecting the pure happiness we both felt. We rushed to the maternity hospital as recommended, where it was confirmed early on in the visit, "Yes, you're pregnant." "We can hear the heartbeat," the doctor announced. Hearing this, we both cried even more, overwhelmed by the joy of the news. Maria, who was with us, also shed tears, expressing her relief and happiness. Following this emotional roller coaster, Maria got engaged to her long-term boyfriend and announced her plans to move to another state with him after resigning from her job. We had been aware of her plans, so it wasn't a shock to us. Meanwhile, my husband, who was about to take over as the new CEO, had his schedule packed with client meetings. The business trip, which he later explained was cut short, allowing him to return home early, was for this transition. However, my mother-in-law was completely out of the loop about Maria's life changes. When Maria mentioned her upcoming marriage and move, my mother-in-law was utterly surprised. How come? Getting hitched, giving up her work, shifting to a different state? She cried in shock. Maria jokingly reminded her, saying, "Yes, you remember what I told you." "Well, it's all settled now, so it doesn't matter." My mother-in-law was taken aback by this, but we all ended up laughing at how confused we were. When we got back home, our room looked brand new, and our previously leaking roof had been completely fixed. We joyfully celebrated the improvements, believing that a new beginning had finally arrived. Even with the renovations and the newfound happiness, things with my mother-in-law were still a little tense. Specifically, my spouse carried a resentment that was difficult to overcome. He was even more distraught than I was, saying he would never want to see his mother again. But instead of always bringing cakes to our coffee breaks, she started to occasionally bring healthy snacks like biscuits. She appeared to be making an effort to lead a healthier lifestyle, particularly since she was aware that she would become a grandmother shortly. Seeing her, the staff members, many of whom had collaborated with my father-in-law during his tenure as CEO, seemed sincere and happy. This helped me see that maybe her prior acts were a little misplaced rather than really cruel. Our conversations increased in frequency and quality over time, and she eventually quit her regular whining. With the birth of our daughter, Catherine, my mother-in-law underwent a true transformation. She started to assist out more, purchasing diapers, and frequently dropping over cooked side dishes for our supper. She would choose not to ring the bell in order not to disturb us, instead leaving these in a cooler outside our door with a note. These kind actions were really appreciated, and they gave me the impression that we could actually get along. This newly discovered tranquility was cemented moments after Catherine's birth. With tears in her eyes, my mother-in-law grasped my hand and expressed her profound gratitude. "Polly, thank you so much," she said. Seeing her real feeling let me realize that this change was real. Maria recently revealed that she was pregnant and appeared to be prospering in her new life. It appears that we won't be spending much time together at the in-laws' place, enjoying supper in a truly peaceful environment. This bright future seemed like a big and welcome departure from the conflicts of the past. Hello to all of you. I am Mia Rabe. How even should I begin? I believed I had a grip on all of my family problems, and at 31, I was excelling in my marketing position. However, everything changed when Maria, my younger sister, began organizing her wedding. I was there to assist her in organizing her ideal day, but it quickly became apparent that there would be more work involved than I had anticipated. Everything was surrounded by the shadow of our father, John. He hasn't been the same since his split. He's been having trouble, getting lost in booze, and making bad decisions. His new girlfriend, Julie, is, in my opinion, one of the worst choices. I felt uneasy about her as soon as I met her. Maria turned to face me one day while we were choosing flowers, her fear evident in her words. "Liv, with hope in her eyes, do you think Dad will actually show up sober?" she questioned. I tried to soothe her by saying, "I really hope so. For your sake, I do." In my heart, though, I wasn't convinced that hope would be sufficient. As the wedding day approached, I began to feel more like a referee than a maid of honor, always attempting to maintain order. Paul, my boyfriend, was incredible through it all. He would constantly attempt to soothe me by telling me things like, "Baby, you can't control everything." I know, I would answer, but deep down, I couldn't quit worrying. But if Dad ruins this day for Maria, I'll never forgive him. I had no idea that things would quickly turn much worse. I had coffee with Teresa, my best friend, about a week before the wedding. She has always been the sensible voice in my life, and right now I really needed her. She inquired, giving me a look that told me she already knew something wasn't right. "What's really going on with you and Julie?" I looked around to be sure someone could hear me as I dropped my voice. "Teresa, there's something not quite right about her." The way she clung to Dad so tightly and would constantly whisper things to him. And here's the thing. I heard her discussing a large score over the phone. Teresa's gaze expanded. "You think she's scamming him?" "I'm going to find out," I said, acknowledging that I didn't know. I was struck by something after that chat, and I couldn't let it go. Trying to piece the puzzle together, I spent late nights quietly calling some of Dad's old pals and browsing over social media. The farther I searched, the more it seemed like I was solving a riddle I wasn't sure I wanted to. The day before the wedding, Dad and Julie unexpectedly showed up when Maria and I were doing some last-minute checks of the location. "Daddy." With a shriek, Maria ran to give him a hug. I remained back and observed intently. Julie's eyes were darting all over the place, as if she was calculatingly inspecting everything. But when Dad stumbled and said, "My little girl, all grown up," my heart fell. He was inebriated already. Julie looked at me smugly as they walked away together. "John, darling, let's go check out the bar." Anger shot through me, but I forced myself to control myself for Maria's benefit. Maria turned to face me, tears still in her eyes. "Liv," I stopped her in her tracks. I hugged her and muttered, "Don't worry, sis. It's all about you and Brian tomorrow. Nothing will make things worse." If only I had realized how mistaken I was. As they say, there's never a quiet moment before a big one. Our storm was building and was going to make landfall with the intensity of a Category 7 hurricane. I silently promised myself that I would always look out for Maria's happiness as I stood there hugging her tight. I didn't realize then that I would be battling for so much more than a picture-perfect wedding day. The ceremony was lovely in and of itself. For a split second, the family conflict seemed to go away, and Maria looked stunning. I saw her exchange vows with Brian while standing next to her, and it gave me a brief feeling of optimism. We could make it through this day without any issues. Maybe, just maybe. I wanted so badly for Maria to have one perfect day, but that fragile hope was shattered the moment we walked into the reception. I saw him almost immediately. Dad, standing by the bar, already drunk, with Julie clinging to him like a lifeline. My heart sank. "You okay?" Paul, my boyfriend, whispered as he squeezed my hand, sensing my unease. "I've got to hold it together for Maria," I muttered, forcing a smile. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before something went terribly wrong. As the night wore on, the tension in the room became unbearable. Dad's laughter grew louder, his movements more and more sloppy. Julie's eyes kept scanning the room, a strange gleam in them that made my skin crawl. Something wasn't right, and I could feel it. "Liv, Dad's making a scene," Maria whispered to me, her voice filled with worry. "I'll handle it," I said, trying to sound confident. I walked over to where Dad was attempting a very unsteady Macarena, stumbling and laughing like nothing was wrong. "Dad, let's get some fresh air," I suggested, trying to stay calm. "Nonsense," he slurred. "I'm celebrating my baby girl's big day." He tried to twirl, but nearly fell over. Julie appeared at his side, tightening her grip on his arm. "Leave him alone. He's having fun," she said sharply. "This isn't about fun. It's about showing respect for Maria on her special day," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Julie's eyes narrowed as she sneered. "You think you're so perfect, don't you? Always trying to control everything." The argument escalated quickly. We moved to a quieter corner of the room, but our voices kept rising with each exchange. "You don't know anything about our family," I spat at her, my patience gone. "I know one thing," she hissed. "Your daddy prefers my company over yours." Something inside me snapped. "Is that before or after you drained him of his money, Julie?" I shot back, my voice trembling with anger. Her face twisted with rage, and before I could react, she lunged at me, grabbing a knife from a nearby dessert table. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. I saw the blade glint under the reception lights, heard people screaming, and felt my heart pounding in my chest. All I could think was, I've ruined Maria's wedding. But then, out of nowhere, Paul tackled Julie, sending the knife clattering to the floor. Chaos erupted around us. Guests screamed and scattered, chairs were overturned, and the whole scene became a blur of noise and movement. Through the mayhem, all I could focus on was Maria. How had it come to this? I had promised to protect her happiness, but now her wedding day was turning into a nightmare. I saw Maria's horrified face as Brian held her back. Security rushed in quickly, restraining Julie as she screamed obscenities at anyone who came near. It was chaos. I stood there frozen as the police arrived and led Julie away in handcuffs. In that brief moment, I caught a glimpse of Dad. He looked completely lost and broken. That was when I realized things would never be the same again. The days following the wedding were a blur. Between police reports, interviews, and endless sleepless nights, I felt like I was living in a nightmare. Every little sound made me jump, and the image of Julie lunging at me, with that knife replayed in my mind over and over. Paul, my rock through all of this, held me close whenever the nightmares hit. "You're safe now, live," he whispered, trying to comfort me. But feeling safe seemed impossible. How could I feel safe when my own father's girlfriend had tried to stab me at my sister's wedding? How do you even begin to recover from something like that? Maria, understandably, was a wreck. When I visited her about a week after everything had happened, she couldn't even look at me. All those months of planning, she said, her voice heavy with sorrow. And for what? My wedding will always be remembered as the day someone tried to kill my sister. "I'm so sorry," I started, guilt weighing heavily on me. She cut me off, shaking her head. "I know it's not your fault, Liv, but still, I can't help feeling like our family is cursed or something." While Maria was dealing with her pain, Dad was in complete denial. He called me constantly, leaving voicemails that made my blood boil. "Mia, sweetie, let's not blow this out of proportion," he'd say. Julie was just upset. She didn't mean any harm. Hearing him defend her like that after everything she had done was infuriating. The final straw came when he showed up at my apartment, reeking of alcohol. I opened the door to find him swaying slightly, his eyes glassy. "Dad, you need to leave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But Pumpkin, we're family. We need to stick together," he slurred, sounding pitiful. I felt something harden inside me as I looked at him. "No, Dad, we're done. I can't do this anymore." The hurt in his eyes almost made me waver, almost. But as I closed the door, I knew it was the right thing to do. Meanwhile, Teresa, my ever-determined best friend, had started digging into Julie's past. What we uncovered left me speechless. "Liv, look at this," Teresa said one night, spreading papers across my coffee table. "Julie's got a record. Assault, fraud, you name it." I scanned the documents, feeling sick to my stomach. How did Dad not know about this? Teresa hesitated, biting her lip. "That's the thing, Liv. I think he did." The truth hit me like a ton of bricks. We found joint bank accounts, suspicious money transfers, evidence that Dad wasn't just a victim in all of this. He was an accomplice. Telling Maria what we discovered was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. We sat together in her kitchen, the wedding gifts still sitting in the corner, untouched. "I can't believe it," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. How could he do this to us? I don't even know him anymore. I didn't have an answer for her. I didn't know who Dad was anymore either. I spoke softly but firmly. "We need to protect ourselves now." Maria looked at me, her expression shifted to one of determination. "I'm with you, Liv, always," she replied. Despite her words, the guilt weighed heavily on me. I had exposed our father's crimes, and in doing so, I might have destroyed his life. But then again, hadn't he already done that to himself? The mix of anger, confusion, and guilt was too much for me to handle alone, so I decided to seek help. That's how I found myself sitting in a therapist's office, trying to make sense of it all. Mia, it's normal to feel conflicted. My therapist, Dr. Jacob, reassured me during one of our sessions. You've been through something traumatic. You're grieving the loss of the father you thought you knew. I stared down at my hands, feeling torn. But shouldn't I hate him after everything he's done? There's no should when it comes to emotions, she explained kindly. What's important is that you acknowledge how you feel and work through it. Working through it sounded easy, but it wasn't. Still, as I left Dr. Jacob's office that day, I felt a small glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild something positive from the ruins of my family's past. For months after the wedding disaster, I found myself in a place I never thought I'd be happy. Despite everything that had happened, I had a strong support system. Maria, Paul, Teresa, and I had become an unbreakable team. Our bond was stronger than ever. One night, while we were having dinner at my apartment, Maria raised her glass. To new beginnings, she toasted. And to family, the one we choose. I added, clanking glasses with my sister. The media was all over Julie's trial. It was a circus. Sitting in that courtroom, my stomach was in knots as Julie's true nature was revealed for everyone to see. Dad sat beside me, looking completely stunned as her history of crimes came to light. But the real shock was yet to come. Teresa and I had been working hard gathering evidence of Dad's involvement in Julie's schemes. During the trial, our lawyer stood up and addressed the court. Your Honor, we have documentation proving John Rabe's involvement in Miss Blake's fraudulent activities. As the legal battle continued, my personal life took an unexpected turn for the better. My career started to take off. One Sunday afternoon, my boss called me into his office. Mia, we're promoting you to Senior Marketing Director, he said with a smile. Your resilience and creativity this past year have been outstanding. I left his office in a daze, immediately calling Paul to share the news. Babe, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you, he exclaimed, excitement clear in his voice. Amidst all the chaos, Maria and Brian made a beautiful decision. They decided to renew their vows. This time, it was a small, intimate ceremony in their backyard with only close friends and family. Second time's the charm, Brian joked, making Maria giggle as they exchanged rings again. Watching them, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. We were finally healing, all of us. Then the day of Julie's sentencing arrived. The courtroom was filled with tension as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. As I sat there, I reflected on how far we had come since that fateful wedding day. We had been through so much pain and betrayal, but somehow we had made it through. We were stronger, and we were moving forward. It wasn't easy, but we had found our way back to each other. The storm had passed, and we were finally finding calm. Despite my trembling hands, I maintained a calm voice as I got up to make my victim impact statement. I started out by saying the wounds from that night are deep, but they strengthened me. I turned to face Julie, realizing that this was my chance to take back my life. I am here today as a survivor, not a victim. I felt closure when Julie was brought away in handcuffs. It seemed like the conclusion of a protracted and traumatic chapter in my life. But a month later was when the big party took place. I was at my favorite restaurant with Maria, Brian, Paul, Teresa, and us celebrating my promotion and all we had accomplished together. To Mia, with a broad smile, Teresa lifted her drink. The most resilient person I've met. I had to interrupt her to say, to all of us. I turned to face those who had supported me during the most trying year of my life. And their looks demonstrated that family is about more than simply blood. It's also about love and commitment. I saw a change in myself as we laughed and told stories. I was struck at how much had changed. The preceding year had been both a horror and, strangely enough, a blessing. It became clear to me who was important. It made me realize how resilient I might be and offered me the guts to rid my life of the poisonous people and negativity. As I sat there, surrounded by true pleasure and love, I realized that this was how my story would finish happily. It was real, which is what made it lovely, even if it wasn't flawless and had scars. I had optimism for the future for the first time in a very long time. I felt thankful for the family I had met and the inner power I had unearthed. That concludes my narrative, but I'd want to know what you think. Given what your father had done, if you had been in my position, would you have continued to set boundaries like I did? Or would you have given him another chance? It's a difficult choice, and I am aware that a lot of you have struggled with poisonous family members. Tell me about your experiences, please. Kindly let us know in the comments how you have managed challenging family dynamics in your personal life. In the event that my story touched you, kindly click the like button and think about subscribing to receive more real-life tales and conversations on resolving challenging family dynamics. I really appreciate your support, which enables me to keep sharing these intimate tales. I appreciate your time, and I hope to see you in the future video.